I'm Callie Morgan, 32, and until yesterday I was the Chief Marketing Officer at Nexus Innovations. 5 years building their brand from nothing to an industry leader, and they thanked me by having security escort me out like a criminal. HR Director Barbara smirked when she said my voice, my ideas, my work all belonged to them now. What they didn't know was who would be signing their $80 million funding round tomorrow. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from and subscribe for more workplace justice stories. My story begins long before that humiliating walk through the office with a cardboard box in my arms. With a Stanford MBA and 5 years at established tech companies like Aptera and DigiVolt, I had built a solid reputation in the industry for creative, data-driven marketing. That's what caught Jason Reed's attention when Nexus Innovations was just a scrappy startup with big ideas but little market recognition. "We need someone who can make noise in a crowded market," Jason told me during our first coffee meeting at a small cafe near their original office. His enthusiasm was infectious as he described their vision for revolutionizing enterprise software. "We can build the best product in the world, but without someone like you, no one will ever know about it." The original Nexus team was just 12 people working out of what was essentially a converted warehouse space. The desks were second-hand, the coffee machine temperamental, and the air conditioning unreliable. But there was an energy there that I hadn't felt at my larger, more established company. I still remember my first day being introduced to the core team members who would become like family. Margaret Chen in finance with her sharp mind and sharper wit. Thomas Patel in engineering, quiet but brilliant, who could translate complex technical concepts into simple language. Diana Rodriguez in product, whose vision for what Nexus could become made me believe we were building something truly special. "Welcome to organized chaos," Diana had said with a laugh, as she showed me to my desk, which was really just a folding table positioned near a window for natural light. "We all wear multiple hats here. Yesterday I was writing product specs, today I'm interviewing a potential customer support hire." Those early days were exhilarating. I worked 14-hour days developing our brand voice, market positioning, and our first real marketing strategy. I used my personal network to get meetings with industry journalists, stayed up until 3 a.m, finishing presentations, and once drove 4 hours to meet a potential client when our flight was canceled due to weather. My first major campaign for Nexus centered around the idea of invisible infrastructure, showing how our software worked seamlessly in the background while businesses focused on their core missions. We created a series of case studies featuring small businesses that had transformed their operations using our platform. The campaign cost a fraction of what our competitors were spending, but it resonated deeply with our target market. Within 6 months, our client list had tripled. Within a year, we'd been featured in TechCrunch, Forbes, and Business Insider. Our team grew from 12 to 50 then, to over 100 within 3 years. We moved offices twice to accommodate the growth, eventually settling into sleek new headquarters in the city's tech corridor. It was during this explosive growth period that Amanda Hayes came back into my life. Amanda and I had been roommates at Stanford, and now she was a senior investment manager at Horizon Capital, one of the most respected venture capital firms in the country. We reconnected over dinner when she was in town for a conference. "I've been hearing good things about Nexus," she told me over pasta and wine. "Your marketing has definitely caught our attention. We've been tracking your growth metrics and they're impressive." I felt a surge of pride hearing this. Amanda didn't offer empty compliments. She was known for her straightforward assessments. When she mentioned that Horizon might be interested in leading our Series B funding round, I was thrilled. This could be the capital injection we needed to scale nationally and eventually globally. But as Nexus grew, subtle changes in the company culture began to emerge. Jason brought in more executives with experience at larger companies. Most were talented professionals who added value, but a few seemed to bring corporate politics along with their expertise. Barbara Collins joined as HR director after 15 years at a Fortune 500 company. From our first meeting, I sensed her coolness toward me. She questioned my team's flexible work arrangements, scrutinized my expense reports in ways she didn't seem to do with other executives, and frequently made comments about bringing more structure to our marketing department. Then came Richard Maxwell, our new CFO. Tall, imposing, with a permanent expression of mild disapproval. Richard immediately began challenging my marketing budget despite our demonstrable ROI. In meetings, he would interrupt my presentations with questions designed to undermine rather than clarify. I'm just not seeing how these branding initiatives translate to bottom-line revenue, became his standard refrain despite the detailed analytics I provided showing exactly that connection. Jason, who had once been my strongest advocate, became increasingly distant as the company grew. Our weekly one-on-one meetings were rescheduled, shortened, or canceled altogether. When I did get time with him, he seemed distracted, often checking his phone or laptop throughout our conversations. When Amanda officially initiated the due diligence process for Horizon Capital's potential $80 million investment in Nexus, I should have been celebrating. Instead, I found myself increasingly sidelined in discussions about the company's future. In the first executive meeting about the funding round, I noticed Richard and Barbara exchanging glances when I spoke a silent communication that made me uneasy. That evening, I met Amanda for a private dinner to help convince her about Nexus's potential. She asked pointed questions about our marketing strategy, competitive positioning, and customer acquisition costs, all areas where I had developed strong systems and results. By the end of dinner, she seemed genuinely excited about Horizon leading our Series B round. "Your marketing vision is a big part of why we're interested," she told me. "The way you've positioned Nexus in the market gives you a sustainable, competitive advantage. That's rare, and it's valuable." I went home feeling reassured about my role at Nexus. But the next morning, walking into our weekly executive meeting, I couldn't help but notice how the conversation stopped abruptly when I entered the room. Something was happening, and for the first time since joining Nexus, I felt like an outsider. The subtle undermining of my position became more obvious in the weeks that followed. Barbara implemented new approval processes that seemed specifically designed to create obstacles for my department. Marketing materials that had previously required only my sign-off now needed review from Barbara's office for brand consistency and from Richard's team for budget alignment. When our Invisible Infrastructure campaign won the industry's prestigious Innovation and Marketing Award, the company announcement barely mentioned my name, referring vaguely to our marketing team's efforts. I had personally led every aspect of that campaign, from concept to execution, often working weekends to make it happen. During our quarterly planning meeting, Richard questioned the size of my team despite our strong performance metrics. "Do we really need 14 people in marketing?" he asked, scanning the budget document through his wire-rimmed glasses. "Most companies our size run leaner marketing departments." "Most companies our size don't have our growth rate," I countered. "Our CAC to LTV ratio is industry-leading, specifically because of how effectively our team operates." Richard's lips thinned. "We should still look at headcount reduction opportunities. Times are getting tighter in the market." Jason, who once would have defended the value of marketing, sat silently reviewing emails on his laptop. When I caught his eye, he simply said, "Let's follow up on this later," which never happened. Meanwhile, Kenneth Allen, our newly hired VP of Sales, began taking credit for marketing initiatives in board meetings and investor calls. During a presentation to potential partners, he referred to my team's carefully crafted industry analysis as some research my team put together, despite having had no involvement in its creation. After the meeting, I confronted him in the hallway. "Kenneth, that market segmentation study was created by my team over 3 months. In the future, I'd appreciate proper attribution." He smiled, though the expression didn't reach his eyes. "We're all one team here, Callie. No need to be territorial. Besides, it sounds better coming from sales when we're talking to partners." As I turned to walk away, I heard him mutter, "Typical marketing, wanting credit for everything." The next day, Diana pulled me aside after a product meeting. "Something weird is happening in exec discussions when you're not there," she whispered. "Barbara keeps bringing up concerns about marketing, and Richard backs her up. Jason doesn't challenge them anymore." A week later, I discovered I had been accidentally excluded from a strategic planning meeting involving all other department heads. When I asked Barbara about it, she blinked innocently and said, "Oh, was marketing supposed to be represented? I thought Kenneth was covering that area since it related to the sales forecast." The final straw came when I learned that members of my team were being invited to meetings with Richard and Kenneth without my knowledge. Ashley, one of my senior content strategists, showed me a calendar invite for a marketing strategy alignment meeting to which I had not been invited. "I assumed you knew about this," she said, confusion evident in her expression. "Should I not attend?" "No, you should definitely go," I told her. Just let me know what happens. She reported back that Richard had questioned team members about marketing expenses and asked for detailed breakdowns of how they spent their time. Kenneth had suggested that certain marketing functions might be more efficiently managed under the sales umbrella. All this was happening while the funding round with Horizon Capital progressed. I was working extra hours preparing marketing materials for investor presentations, updating our growth projections, and refining our competitive analysis. Amanda called frequently with questions that I happily answered, proud of what we had built and excited about where additional capital could take us. Then I discovered something troubling. While reviewing some legal documents related to our intellectual property, I found my signature on a document I had never seen before. It transferred certain marketing IP rights from my personal creation to company ownership retroactively. The signature looked like mine, but I had absolutely no recollection of ever seeing this document, let alone signing it. I brought this to Thomas's attention over lunch, knowing his integrity was unquestionable. Something's not right, Thomas. People are being weird around me. I'm being excluded from meetings, and now I find documents with my signature that I never signed. Thomas frowned, pushing his sandwich aside. I've noticed tension in the executive team lately. Barbara's been making comments about bringing in people with big company experience who understand proper corporate structure. It feels like they're building a case for something. That afternoon, Amanda called to tell me how impressed Horizon Capital was with Nexus's marketing strategy and brand positioning. The investment committee specifically mentioned your work as a key differentiator in the market. They see it as a sustainable competitive advantage. I should have felt validated. Instead, a growing unease settled in my stomach. Despite the increasing hostility, I remained dedicated to Nexus. This was the company I had helped build from almost nothing. My blood, sweat, and tears were in every aspect of our market presence. The next week, Barbara implemented a new voice approval process requiring all external communications to go through her office before being released. This effectively gave her veto power over my department's work. When I objected, she smiled thinly and said, "This comes directly from Jason. We need to ensure consistent messaging as we approach the funding round closure." Shortly after, I received an updated employment agreement with troubling IP clauses. One section stated that all voice tone creative concepts and marketing approaches developed during my employment belonged exclusively to the company in perpetuity. Another prohibited me from using similar approaches, methodologies, or frameworks at any future employer. When I asked our legal counsel about these clauses, he avoided eye contact and mumbled something about standard protection of company assets. Nothing about this felt standard. The systematic campaign against me shifted into high gear when I received my first negative performance review in 5 years at Nexus. Despite exceeding all quantifiable targets and metrics, Barbara's assessment cited vague communication issues and cultural fit concerns. "What specific examples can you provide of these communication issues?" I asked, maintaining my composure, though my heart was pounding. Barbara shuffled the papers in front of her. "There have been multiple instances where executive team members felt your tone was confrontational." "Which team members? Which instances specifically?" "I'm not at liberty to share that information," she replied, her voice cool. "But trust that this feedback comes from multiple sources." I requested a meeting with Jason to discuss the review, but he seemed uncomfortable throughout our conversation, checking his watch repeatedly and avoiding direct eye contact. "I trust Barbara's assessment processes," he said, staring at a point just above my head. "HR has a good pulse on organizational dynamics." "Jason, we've worked together for 5 years. You know my work ethic and my commitment to Nexus. Does any of this actually sound like me?" He sighed, finally meeting my gaze. "Companies change as they grow, Callie. Sometimes people who were right for the early stages aren't the right fit for the next phase." The words sounded rehearsed, as if someone else had written them for him. The next day, Zoe, a junior designer on my team, showed me an email thread she had been accidentally copied on. The subject line read, "Marketing Department Restructuring Post-Funding," and it included messages between Richard, Kenneth, and Barbara discussing plans to streamline marketing operations after the Horizon Capital deal closed. "I thought you should see this," Zoe whispered, glancing nervously at the door. "It doesn't seem right what they're doing." That same afternoon, I found a document left behind in the main conference room with the title, "Leadership Alignment Post-Funding Transition." My name was listed under Phase 1 transitions alongside two other executives who had been early employees. Next to my name were the words replacement identified, awaiting funding closure. Barbara began scheduling mandatory daily check-ins that felt more like interrogations than professional meetings. She questioned every decision I made, documented every instance where I expressed disagreement with Richard or Kenneth, and made comments about alignment with company direction. Meanwhile, Richard began questioning every marketing expense, no matter how small or routine. Budget approvals that once took hours now took weeks, creating bottlenecks that impacted my team's ability to execute campaigns on schedule. A new clause appeared in the updated company handbook, claiming ownership of all employee communications, including verbal presentations, communication style, and personal brand associated with company activities. When I asked our legal department about the enforceability of such broad claims, they avoided giving direct answers. I noticed that the company lawyers were drafting new contracts for marketing team members with expansive non-compete and IP assignment clauses. When I expressed concern about how these might impact my team's future career options, Barbara dismissed me with, "This is standard practice for a company preparing for significant investment." Growing increasingly concerned, I reached out to my friend Elaine Porter, a lawyer specializing in employment law, and described the situation during a weekend hike. "This sounds like constructive dismissal," she said after listening to the details. "They're creating a paper trail and making your position untenable. The IP claims are particularly troubling. Some of what you're describing goes beyond what's legally enforceable, but they may be betting you won't fight it." That evening, Amanda called about the final funding stages. "We need to do one more presentation for the investment committee next week," she said. "I'll need you to walk them through the marketing roadmap for the next 18 months. Your marketing strategy is a key factor in our valuation model." Of course, I agreed. "Just send me the details and I'll be prepared." The next day, I learned that Barbara had intercepted Amanda's call to me and rerouted it to Kenneth. Later that afternoon, I overheard Barbara telling Richard in the break room, "We'll deal with the Callie situation after the funding closes. Jason agrees it's the safest approach." I received an email from Amanda asking why I hadn't been responding to her messages about the presentation schedule, though I had received no previous messages from her. It became clear that my communications were being monitored and possibly intercepted. That night, I forwarded key emails and documents to my personal account, including evidence of the forged signature, the intercepted communications, and the restructuring plans I had discovered. If they were building a case against me, I needed to protect myself. The next morning, I called Patrick Reynolds, a respected employment attorney known for handling cases involving executive disputes and intellectual property rights. His reputation for tough but ethical representation made him the right choice for my situation. "I'd like to schedule a consultation," I told his assistant. "It's regarding potential constructive dismissal and IP rights issues." Little did I know that 24 hours later, I would be sitting in his office after being marched out of the company I helped build. The email arrived at 8:30 in the morning, mandatory meeting with HR at 10. Conference room B. No reschedule possible, no agenda, no explanation. I knew immediately what was happening. I backed up additional files, made sure my personal items would fit in one box, and put on my most confidence-inspiring outfit, a navy blue suit that I reserved for important client presentations. At precisely 10 o'clock, I walked into conference room B to find Barbara seated at the head of the table with Leslie, her HR assistant, taking notes on a laptop. Richard sat to Barbara's right reviewing documents. Kenneth was there too, arms crossed, leaning back in his chair with an expression of manufactured concern. The only person missing was Jason. "Where's Jason?" I asked, remaining standing, though there was an empty chair clearly intended for me. "Jason has delegated this matter to me," Barbara replied smoothly. "Please sit down, Callie." I sat, maintaining eye contact with Barbara, refusing to show the anxiety churning inside me. She slid a folder across the table containing a termination letter. The heading read, "Immediate termination of employment, cause." "Nexus Innovations is terminating your employment effective immediately," Barbara said, her voice formal but with an undercurrent of satisfaction. "This decision is based on documented performance issues and breaches of confidentiality." "What breaches of confidentiality?" I asked, keeping my voice level. Richard leaned forward. "We have evidence that you forwarded company documents to your personal email account. a clear violation of your employment agreement and our security policies. I sent myself copies of my own work product and evidence of misconduct that I observed, I replied. Nothing proprietary or client-related. Barbara's lips curved into what might generously be called a smile. As per your contract, your voice is now our property, along with all marketing materials, presentations, and strategies you created during your employment. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. My voice. The thing that made me who I was professionally. The distinct approach and perspective I brought to my work. Furthermore, Richard added, adjusting his glasses, you are forbidden from contacting any clients, partners, or investors of Nexus Innovations. That includes Horizon Capital. As if on cue, the door opened, and security guard Eric appeared holding an empty cardboard box. This individual will escort you to your desk to collect personal belongings, then accompany you from the building, Barbara continued. You are required to surrender your laptop access card and company phone before leaving. I sat perfectly still, processing what was happening. 5 years of dedication, countless nights and weekends sacrificed for this company, and it ended like this, being treated like a criminal in front of colleagues who had plotted against me. Do you have any questions? Barbara asked, her tone suggesting that questions would be unwelcome. Just one, I said, meeting her gaze steadily. Does Horizon Capital know about this decision? A flicker of uncertainty crossed Barbara's face before her professional mask returned. All necessary stakeholders have been informed of appropriate transition details. That was corporate speak for no. They hadn't told Amanda. I stood up, straightened my jacket, and said, I'll gather my things then. Eric followed me to my desk, standing awkwardly nearby, as curious eyes peered over cubicle walls and through office doors. Colleagues I had worked with for years suddenly became intensely focused on their computer screens, avoiding eye contact. Only Diana approached, squeezing my arm silently as she passed her eyes, communicating what she couldn't say aloud. I placed family photos and a few personal items in the box, leaving behind the many mementos from successful campaigns and team celebrations. Those belonged to Nexus memories, and Nexus was no longer my home. Eric walked me to the elevator, standing silently beside me as we descended to the lobby. As the doors closed, giving us privacy, he spoke quietly. For what it's worth, I think this is wrong. Everyone knows what you've done for this company. His simple acknowledgement nearly broke my composure. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. In the parking garage, I placed the box in my trunk, closed it, then sat in the driver's seat, and finally allowed the emotions to surface. Anger, betrayal, humiliation, fear, they washed over me in waves. 5 years of my life, my creative energy, my professional identity, all reduced to a box of trinkets and a coldly worded termination letter. After 10 minutes of allowing myself to feel the full impact of what had happened, I wiped my eyes, started the car, and called Patrick Reynolds. His assistant put me through immediately. I've been terminated, I said, without preamble. They're claiming ownership of my voice and forbidding me from contacting Horizon Capital. Come to my office, Patrick replied. Bring all documentation you have. An hour later, I was sitting across from Patrick in his downtown office, the contents of my box spread across his conference table, along with printed copies of the emails and documents I had forwarded to myself. Patrick, a tall man with silver hair and penetrating eyes, reviewed the materials methodically, asking occasional clarifying questions. When he reached the termination letter, his eyebrows rose. This clause about owning your voice is extraordinarily broad, he noted, and likely unenforceable as written. They're overreaching. He continued examining the documents, pausing at the funding round materials. Tell me about Horizon Capital and your connection there. I explained my history with Amanda, her role in the funding process, and how the investment committee had specifically cited my marketing strategy as a key factor in their valuation. Patrick's expression shifted as pieces fell into place. Have they signed the final funding papers yet? The signing ceremony is scheduled for tomorrow morning, I replied. Amanda mentioned needing me to present to the committee one last time, but that communication was intercepted. Patrick leaned back, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. So, Horizon Capital is expecting you to be part of tomorrow's proceedings, but Nexus has terminated you and forbidden you from contacting them. He smiled slightly. That creates a very interesting situation. He turned to his computer and began typing rapidly. I'm checking something in your original employment agreement. Yes, here at Island. He swiveled the screen so I could see. This IP clause is much more limited than what they're now claiming. It covers specific work product, but not your voice or methodologies. I felt a small spark of hope ignite. What does that mean for my situation? It means they've significantly overstepped, Patrick replied. Furthermore, terminating you one day before a major funding event where your presence is expected raises serious questions about good faith dealing. He continued reviewing documents, flagging sections with colored tabs. There are multiple labor law violations here. The constructive dismissal pattern is well documented in your emails. The forged signature on the IP transfer document is particularly troubling from a legal standpoint. Patrick looked up at me, his expression serious. What do you want out of this Callie reinstatement settlement? Something else. The question made me pause. What did I want? Part of me wanted to fight to get my job back. I had built so much at Nexus. Another part knew that the environment had become irreparably toxic. I want recognition for my contributions, I said finally. I want protection for my team from similar treatment. And I want fair compensation for what they've tried to take from me. Patrick nodded. I think we have leverage to achieve those goals, particularly with the funding signing tomorrow. He outlined a strategy that made my heart race with both anxiety and anticipation. They're not expecting you to show up tomorrow, he explained. That gives us the element of surprise. Given what you've shown me, their general counsel will recognize the legal vulnerability immediately. As we developed the plan further, I felt uncertainty creeping in. What if this backfires? What if it hurts the company I helped build? Patrick's expression softened slightly. This isn't about hurting Nexus. It's about holding specific individuals accountable for unethical and potentially illegal actions. The company will benefit in the long run from better leadership practices. By late afternoon, we had compiled a comprehensive timeline showing the systematic targeting, prepared documentation of all labor violations, and drafted a settlement demand with specific terms. Patrick had also consulted with Rachel Foster, an IP specialist lawyer, who confirmed that the voice ownership clause was grossly overreaching and unlikely to survive legal challenge. As I prepared to leave Patrick's office, my phone buzzed with messages from concerned team members. Diana, Thomas, and Margaret had all reached out, having heard about my termination. Diana's message was particularly direct. This is wrong. What can we do? I replied simply, thank you for your support. I'm handling it. We'll update you soon. That evening, alone in my apartment, I alternated between conviction about our plan and waves of doubt. Was I doing the right thing? Should I just walk away and start fresh somewhere else? The thought of facing Barbara, Richard, and Kenneth again made my stomach clench. I barely slept, going over scenarios in my mind, imagining what might happen the next morning. By dawn, I had made peace with our approach. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about standing up to bullying tactics that could affect others if left unchallenged. I dressed carefully in my most professional attire, a charcoal gray suit with subtle pinstripes, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back neatly. The outfit of someone who knew her worth and wasn't afraid to claim it. Patrick and I met for a final strategy session before heading to Nexus headquarters. Remember, he said as we walked toward his car. Stay calm, regardless of what happens. The law is on our side here. I took a deep breath and nodded, ready to face whatever came next. The night after my termination was one of the most emotionally turbulent of my life. Sitting at my dining table with papers spread everywhere, I cycled through shock, betrayal, anger, and finally determination. Patrick had sent me home with copies of relevant labor laws and IP regulations, which I studied between bouts of processing my emotions. Document everything while it's fresh, he had advised. Every conversation, every incident, every player involved. I created a detailed timeline starting from when Barbara first joined Nexus, noting each instance of undermining behavior, each exclusion from meetings, each change in policy that targeted my department. Seeing it all laid out chronologically made the systematic nature of their campaign unmistakable. Around midnight, my phone rang. It was Patrick. I've been reviewing your original employment contract against the new clauses they've been trying to implement, he said, forgoing any greeting. The discrepancies are striking. In what way? I asked, pushing aside a half-empty cup of cold tea. Your original IP assignment was standard. Work product created specifically for Nexus belongs to Nexus. But this new language about owning your voice and prohibiting you from using similar methodologies at future employers, completely overreaching and likely unenforceable. I felt a small surge of relief. So they can't actually own my voice. Not in the way they're claiming, Patrick confirmed. I've consulted with Rachel Foster, who specializes in IP law. She says these kinds of broad claims are increasingly common but rarely hold up in court. They're designed to intimidate rather than to be legally sound. We spent an hour reviewing my documentation with Patrick, occasionally asking me to elaborate on specific incidents. The pattern here is textbook constructive dismissal, he noted. They systematically made your position untenable, excluded you from key functions of your role, and created a hostile work environment. What about the funding situation? I asked. They specifically prohibited me from contacting Horizon Capital. That's where things get interesting, Patrick replied. If Horizon's investment committee approved funding based partly on your marketing strategy, and if they're expecting you to be present at tomorrow's signing, Nexus may have created a material problem for themselves. After we hung up, I received texts from Diana, Thomas, and Margaret, all expressing shock at my termination and offering support. Diana's message was particularly heartening. The team is in uproar. Nobody believes the performance issue's nonsense. Kenneth tried to hold a marketing department meeting and got bombarded with questions he couldn't answer. Thomas wrote, "Something seems off about the timing. Why push you out right before the funding closes? It doesn't make business sense." I responded to each with thanks but kept details vague, following Patrick's advice not to discuss strategy outside of privileged communications. Around 2 a.m, I received a surprising call from Amanda. "Callie, what the hell is going on? I just got a weird email saying you've departed to pursue other opportunities and that Kenneth will be handling your presentation slot tomorrow." "They terminated me today," I replied simply. "What? Why?" Her shock sounded genuine. "Officially, performance issues and confidentiality breaches." "Really?" "Because Barbara, Richard, and Kenneth have been working to push me out for months, and they didn't want me around once the funding closed. But our investment committee specifically referenced your marketing strategy in their approval notes," Amanda said. "Your brand positioning and customer acquisition approach were key factors in our valuation model." This confirmation from Amanda strengthened our position considerably. When I relayed this information to Patrick the next morning, he nodded thoughtfully. "This confirms what I suspected. Horizon Capital is investing in a vision that you were instrumental in creating and executing. By removing you without disclosure prior to closing, Nexus executives may have created a material misrepresentation situation." We met at his office at 7:30, giving us time to finalize our approach before the 9 o'clock signing ceremony at Nexus headquarters. Patrick had prepared a folder containing key documents, my original employment agreement, evidence of the forged signature on the IP transfer, documented pattern of exclusion from key meetings, the termination letter with its overreaching claims, and Amanda's confirmation about the importance of my role to the investment decision. "Here's how we'll approach this," Patrick explained, his voice calm and measured. "We'll arrive about 15 minutes before the scheduled signing. We'll request to speak with William Norton, their general counsel, privately before the ceremony begins. If that's not possible, we'll enter the meeting directly." "And if they refuse to let us in?" I asked. "They won't want a scene in front of Horizon Capital," Patrick replied. "But if necessary, I have a letter prepared that outlines potential legal claims, including fraudulent misrepresentation to investors, which we can have delivered to both parties simultaneously." We role-played different scenarios, anticipating various responses from Nexus executives. Patrick advised me to remain composed regardless of provocation. "Your demeanor is important here," he emphasized. "Calm, professional, and confident. Let me do most of the talking initially. If addressed directly, be factual and unemotional in your responses." As we prepared to leave for Nexus headquarters, I received a text from Diana. "If you need moral support today, I can be there. Just say the word." I appreciated her offer but decided against involving her directly. This confrontation needed to remain between the executive's legal counsel and Horizon Capital representatives. In the car, Patrick asked me one final important question. What outcome are you seeking here, Callie? We should be clear about your ideal resolution. I considered carefully before answering. I want acknowledgement of my contributions to Nexus. I want protection for my team against similar treatment. I want fair compensation for the value I've created. And I want these tactics to stop. Would you want reinstatement under the right conditions? Patrick asked. This was the hardest question. Despite everything, I still felt connected to Nexus. Not to Barbara, Richard, or Kenneth, but to the company I had helped build, the brand I had crafted, and the team I had assembled. Yes, I said finally. With appropriate protections and restructuring of reporting relationships. But only if Jason acknowledges what happened and takes steps to address the toxic culture that's developed. Patrick nodded. That gives us parameters for negotiation. We'll start by addressing the legal vulnerabilities their actions have created, then move toward potential remedies. As we pulled into the Nexus visitor parking area, I took deep, steadying breaths. I had spent 5 years pouring my heart and soul into this company. I had helped transform it from an unknown startup to an industry leader on the verge of securing $80 million in funding. I deserved better than being escorted out like a criminal. Ready? Patrick asked, gathering his briefcase. I straightened my jacket, lifted my chin, and nodded. Ready. We walked through the glass doors of Nexus headquarters at 8:45, exactly 15 minutes before the scheduled signing ceremony. Alice, the receptionist, looked up as we approached, her professional smile freezing when she recognized me. Callie, you're not supposed to, she stammered, eyes darting to the security desk. Good morning, Alice, I replied calmly. This is Patrick Reynolds, my attorney. We're here for the Horizon Capital signing. Before Alice could respond, the security guard approached. Miss Morgan, I was informed you're not permitted on premises. Patrick stepped forward, offering his business card. I'm Patrick Reynolds, representing Miss Morgan in a legal matter directly pertinent to today's funding event. We need to speak with William Norton immediately. The guard looked uncertain, glancing between his instructions and the confident attorney standing before him. After a moment's hesitation, he picked up his phone. While he spoke quietly into the receiver, I noticed employees watching from the lobby area whispering to each other. Word of our arrival would spread quickly through the building. After a brief conversation, the guard reluctantly nodded. You can go up, but I need to escort you. The elevator ride was tense and silent. When the doors opened on the executive floor, we were met by William Norton, Nexus's general counsel, a thin man with rimless glasses and a perpetually concerned expression. This is highly irregular, William began, his voice low. Miss Morgan was terminated for cause yesterday. That termination is part of what we need to discuss, Patrick replied smoothly. There are serious legal matters affecting today's funding event that require immediate attention. William's eyes narrowed, but he nodded curtly and led us to a small conference room adjacent to the main boardroom where the signing ceremony would take place. Through the glass partition, I could see people gathering, the Nexus executive team, Horizon Capital representatives, and various lawyers arranging documents on the large table. You have 5 minutes, William said, checking his watch. Patrick didn't waste time. Nexus has created a significant legal problem for itself, and potentially for Horizon Capital as well. Miss Morgan was terminated one day before a major funding event where her presence was expected by investors who made their decision based partly on her marketing strategy and leadership. He opened his folder and slid several documents across the table. Additionally, we have evidence of forged signatures on IP transfer documents, systematic constructive dismissal and termination terms that grossly exceed the scope of her original employment agreement. William's expression remained neutral as he scanned the documents, but I noticed his fingers tightening slightly on the paper. These are serious allegations that would require thorough investigation, he said carefully. Indeed, Patrick agreed. An investigation that would necessarily delay today's funding event. Or we can address these issues now directly with all relevant parties present. At that moment, there was a knock on the door, and Barbara entered without waiting for a response. Her confident stride faltered when she saw me. "What is she doing here?" Barbara demanded, her voice sharp. "She's been terminated and is prohibited from contact with Horizon Capital." "That prohibition is part of our legal concern," Patrick replied, maintaining his calm demeanor. "Miss Morgan has a long-standing professional relationship with Amanda Hayes at Horizon, who has confirmed that their investment committee specifically cited Miss Morgan's marketing strategy as a key factor in their valuation and approval." Barbara's face paled slightly. "William, we need to proceed with the signing. Everyone is waiting." William held up one hand, still reviewing the documents Patrick had provided. "Barbara, did you consult with legal before implementing these new IP clauses?" Before Barbara could answer, the door opened again, and Jason appeared, followed by Richard and Amanda Hayes from Horizon Capital. Jason looked genuinely shocked. "What's happening here?" Amanda rushed forward. "Callie, I've been trying to reach you about the presentation. What's going on?" Barbara stepped between us. "Amanda, Miss Morgan is no longer with Nexus. As I explained in my email, Kenneth will be handling the marketing presentation." Amanda frowned. "Your email said she left to pursue other opportunities." "That's clearly not the case if she's here with legal counsel." Patrick took control of the situation. "Mr. Reed, I'm Patrick Reynolds, representing Callie Morgan. We have documented evidence of systematic targeting, constructive dismissal, and potentially fraudulent representation to Horizon Capital regarding Miss Morgan's role in the company." He turned to face William directly. "I believe Mr. Norton has had a chance to review some of the preliminary documentation and can confirm the seriousness of these matters." All eyes turned to William, whose professional composure had slipped slightly as he read through the evidence. He looked up at Jason, then at Barbara and Richard. "Jason, we need to discuss this privately before proceeding with the signing." By now, the commotion had attracted attention from the boardroom. Charlotte Murphy, Horizon Capital's general counsel, entered with a questioning look. "Is there a problem with the documentation?" she asked, looking between the tense faces. Patrick stepped forward, introducing himself. "There's a situation that potentially affects the representations made to Horizon Capital during the due diligence process." Charlotte's expression sharpened immediately. "What kind of situation?" Patrick handed her a copy of the folder he had given William. "The short version is that Nexus terminated their chief marketing officer yesterday without informing Horizon, despite knowing that your investment committee specifically cited her marketing strategy and leadership as key factors in your valuation model." Amanda nodded in confirmation. "Callie's marketing approach was central to our assessment of Nexus's competitive advantage. The committee specifically requested her presentation on future marketing strategy as part of our final approval process." Charlotte opened the folder and began reviewing its contents, her expression growing more concerned with each page. William moved to stand beside her, pointing out certain sections in hushed tones. The tension in the room was palpable. Barbara stood rigidly by the door, her earlier confidence evaporated. Richard stared at the floor, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Jason looked increasingly uncomfortable as the reality of the situation became clear. After several minutes of quiet consultation, Charlotte looked up. "Amanda, I think we need to pause the signing process while we review these issues." Barbara stepped forward. "The signing documents are all prepared. The press release is scheduled. Delaying now would create market speculation that could harm both companies." "What would create more harm," Charlotte replied coolly, "is proceeding with an $80 million investment based on potentially misrepresented information." She turned to Jason. "Mr. Reed, I suggest we all sit down and address these concerns immediately. If they can be resolved satisfactorily, we can proceed today. If not, we'll need to reconvene after further review." Jason nodded, finally finding his voice. "Let's use the main boardroom. Everyone who's not directly involved, please wait outside." As we moved toward the boardroom, Kenneth appeared in the doorway, blocking our path. "What's she doing here?" he demanded, glaring at me. "She was terminated for performance issues and confidentiality breaches." Patrick answered before I could speak. "Those allegations will be addressed as part of this discussion. Please step aside." Kenneth looked to Jason for support, but Jason merely shook his head slightly. Reluctantly, Kenneth moved aside, his face flushing with anger. Inside the boardroom, we arranged ourselves around the large table. Horizon's team on one side, Nexus executives on the other, with legal counsel for both companies at opposite ends. Patrick and I sat together near Charlotte and Amanda. William cleared his throat. To address the immediate concern, it appears there are questions about Miss Morgan's termination and its potential impact on the representations made to Horizon Capital during due diligence. Patrick nodded. Specifically, Nexus executives terminated Miss Morgan one day before the funding signing, knowing that Horizon Capital's investment committee had approved funding based partly on her marketing leadership. Furthermore, they prohibited her from contacting Horizon, effectively preventing disclosure of this material change before closing. Charlotte looked directly at Jason. "Is this accurate, Mr. Reed?" Jason shifted uncomfortably. The timing was unfortunate. But the termination was for legitimate business reasons. What legitimate business reasons? Amanda asked. Callie's marketing strategy is one of the primary reasons we valued Nexus at $400 million. Our entire competitive analysis is based on the brand positioning and customer acquisition approach she developed. Barbara interjected. Kenneth Allen has fully taken over those responsibilities and strategies. There will be no disruption to marketing operations. Amanda's expression made it clear she wasn't buying this explanation. Kenneth doesn't have Callie's track record or vision. If he were leading marketing from the beginning, our valuation model would have been different. William, who had been reviewing more of Patrick's documentation, looked up with concern. Jason, there are some serious issues here beyond the timing. This IP assignment document appears to have Miss Morgan's signature, but she denies signing it. The termination letter claims ownership rights that significantly exceed the scope of her original employment agreement. Patrick slid another document across the table to Charlotte. This is Miss Morgan's original employment agreement with standard IP assignment clauses. Compare that to the termination letter claiming ownership of her voice and prohibiting use of similar methodologies at future employers. Charlotte examined both documents, then exchanged a significant look with William. This discrepancy is concerning from a legal standpoint. Patrick continued. We also have documented evidence of systematic exclusion from key meetings, interception of communications with Horizon Capital, and what appears to be a coordinated effort to remove Miss Morgan before the funding closed. The room fell silent as Charlotte and William continued reviewing the documentation. Jason glanced between Barbara and Richard, his expression increasingly troubled. Kenneth sat stiffly, arms crossed defensively. Finally, William looked up at Jason. I recommend we take a brief recess to discuss this privately. Jason nodded, standing. Let's take 30 minutes. Horizon team, please make yourselves comfortable in the executive lounge. Nexus executives and legal, let's use my office. As the Nexus team filed out, Amanda approached me. I had no idea this was happening, Callie. You should have called me directly. I was explicitly forbidden from contacting you, I replied. And apparently my emails to you were being intercepted. Her eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in determination. Well, they've created a significant problem for themselves. Charlotte is not someone who takes potential misrepresentation lightly. The next 30 minutes were tense as we waited in the boardroom. Patrick used the time to outline possible outcomes and strategies for each scenario. Amanda and Charlotte conferred quietly at the far end of the table. When the Nexus team returned, I could immediately sense a shift in the dynamics. Jason led the group, looking resolved if somewhat chastened. Barbara and Richard followed, both notably subdued. William came last, carrying a folder of his own. Jason spoke first. After reviewing the documentation and consulting with legal counsel, we recognize that there have been irregularities in how this situation was handled. He glanced at Barbara before continuing. We would like to propose a resolution that addresses the concerns raised and allows the funding to proceed. William distributed documents from his folder. We've drafted a preliminary agreement that would reinstate Miss Morgan with appropriate protections, address compensation for any damages, and implement oversight mechanisms to prevent similar situations in the future. Patrick reviewed the document carefully, occasionally making notes in the margin. After thorough examination, he leaned over to discuss specific points with me in hushed tones. The terms are reasonable, he said after our consultation. They're offering reinstatement with enhanced protections against retaliation, back pay plus damages, and an investigation into HR practices. Barbara and Richard would be placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. I considered the offer, looking across at Jason, whose expression seemed genuinely regretful. The company I had helped build was still there beneath the layer of toxic politics that had developed. With Barbara and Richard removed from the equation, perhaps it could return to its original vision and values. I accept these terms with the addition of protections for my team members against similar treatment, I said finally. William nodded, making a note on his copy. We can incorporate that provision. Charlotte reviewed the proposed agreement and nodded her approval. This addresses our concerns about material representation. Assuming these terms are implemented immediately, Horizon is prepared to proceed with the funding. Jason let out a visible sigh of relief. Thank you. We'll execute this agreement now before the funding documents. Barbara, who had been uncharacteristically silent, finally spoke. Jason, you can't seriously be considering keeping her after her behavior. She violated confidentiality policies by forwarding company documents to her personal email. Jason turned to her, his expression hardening. Barbara, enough. The documents she forwarded were evidence of misconduct that you were involved in. William has advised me that your actions and those of Richard have exposed the company to significant legal liability. We'll discuss your status separately after this meeting. Barbara's face flushed with anger, but she remained silent, recognizing her position had become untenable. William prepared the final version of our agreement, which Patrick and I reviewed carefully before signing. Jason signed on behalf of Nexus, and William notarized the document. With our agreement executed, Charlotte signaled that the funding signing could proceed. The atmosphere shifted from tense confrontation to business-like efficiency as the investment documents were distributed. Amanda approached me with a warm smile. I'm glad this is resolved. Horizon is investing in Nexus's future, and you're a critical part of that future. As we prepared for the formal signing ceremony, I caught a glimpse of Barbara clearing personal items from her office, steadfastly avoiding eye contact with everyone. The power dynamic had shifted completely in the space of 2 hours. Jason came to stand beside me as the photographers set up for the ceremonial signing. I owe you an apology, Callie, he said quietly. I let myself be influenced by the wrong people and lost sight of what built this company. It won't happen again. I nodded, accepting his words, but knowing that rebuilding trust would take time. For now, it was enough that justice had been served, and I could return to the work I loved with proper recognition and protection. The signing proceeded smoothly, with Amanda and Jason shaking hands for the cameras as the $80 million investment became official. I stood with the executive team where I belonged, watching as Nexus entered its next chapter, one that I would help write on my own terms. The days following the dramatic confrontation and reversal were a whirlwind of activity and adjustment. My reinstatement was announced to the company through an all-hands meeting where Jason publicly acknowledged the misunderstanding that had led to my brief departure. While his wording was diplomatic, the absence of Barbara and Richard spoke volumes. The settlement agreement included several key provisions: back pay for the day I had been terminated, damages for emotional distress, enhanced protections against future retaliation, and specific language nullifying the overreaching IP claims in my termination letter. Most importantly to me, it included protections for my team members against similar treatment. Barbara cleared out her office that same afternoon, carefully avoiding eye contact with anyone as she carried her personal items to her car. Richard was placed on administrative leave, pending a full investigation into his role in the situation. Kenneth remained, but his influence was significantly diminished, and he was removed from any oversight of marketing activities. William Norton, the general counsel, took me aside after the dust had settled. For what it's worth, I was not consulted on the termination process or the IP claims in your letter. Those came directly from Barbara and were implemented without proper legal review. I appreciated his candor, but noted that his failure to provide oversight had contributed to the problem. Perhaps a more robust legal review process for HR actions would benefit the company moving forward, I suggested. He nodded, acknowledging the point. Jason's apologies seemed genuine, and he made efforts to rebuild our working relationship. He scheduled regular one-on-one meetings and included me in all strategic discussions. I failed as a leader by not paying attention to what was happening in my own company, he admitted during our first private conversation after my return. I got caught up in the excitement of growth and fundraising and stopped watching the culture. The funding announcement went out as planned, with Nexus receiving positive coverage in the business press. Amanda made sure that my role was appropriately highlighted in Horizon Capital's statements about the investment. We're investing in Nexus's innovative approach to enterprise software, particularly its unique market positioning developed under Callie Morgan's leadership, read the official press release. My team welcomed me back with obvious relief. Diana organized an impromptu celebration in the marketing department, complete with champagne, opened after business hours, and a card signed by everyone. Never doubted you for a minute, she whispered as she hugged me. Messages of support flooded in from across the company. Thomas sent a particularly touching email. What happened to you was wrong. Your return shows that sometimes justice actually prevails in corporate America. It gives the rest of us hope. Even Alice, the receptionist, stopped me in the lobby to say, I'm so glad you're back. It wasn't the same without you, even for a day. Rebuilding trust with Jason and the executive team was a gradual process. The dynamics had shifted permanently. They now understood that I had boundaries and would enforce them. I had demonstrated that I valued myself enough to fight for fair treatment, and that commanded a different kind of respect. An ethics investigation into HR practices was launched, led by an independent consultant. The initial findings revealed several concerning patterns beyond my case, including disproportionate scrutiny of female executives and preferential treatment for those hired by Barbara. The consultant recommended comprehensive reforms to HR policies and practices, which Jason committed to implementing. Kenneth and I established a wary professional relationship. He avoided direct confrontation but continued to advocate for greater sales influence over marketing decisions. With Jason's support, I maintained clear boundaries between our departments while establishing collaborative processes that respected both functions. One unexpected outcome was a lunch invitation from Charlotte Murphy, Horizon Capital's general counsel. Your handling of that situation was impressive, she told me over salads at a restaurant near the office. Not many people would have had the presence of mind to document everything and seek proper legal counsel. Most would have just walked away. I considered that I admitted, but it felt wrong to let them take credit for my work while pushing me out the door. Charlotte nodded. In my 20 years of corporate law, I've seen too many talented people pushed out through exactly these kinds of tactics. Standing your ground not only helped you, but potentially others who might have faced similar treatment. The marketing department flourished in the months following the confrontation. With renewed confidence in my leadership and protection for the team, creativity flowed more freely. We launched a new campaign that built on our invisible infrastructure concept, extending it to show how Nexus enabled business transformation. The campaign generated a 40% increase in qualified leads within the first quarter. Amanda and I maintained our friendship meeting monthly for dinner to catch up on personal and professional developments. You know, she said during one such dinner, what happened to you happens to women in tech all the time. The difference is that most don't have the documentation, legal support, or leverage to fight back effectively. Her comments stayed with me, prompting me to start a mentoring program for women in marketing and technology. The program focused on documentation practices, understanding employment agreements, and recognizing early warning signs of systematic undermining. It became one of the most popular professional development initiatives at Nexus. 6 months after the confrontation, I was asked to speak at a Women in Technology conference about my experience. I shared the story, without naming the company or individuals, focusing on the lessons I had learned. Document everything, especially when something feels wrong. Know your employment agreement and what it actually covers. Build relationships outside your direct reporting line. Recognize the difference between normal workplace challenges and systematic targeting. Seek professional legal advice early, rather than trying to handle it alone. Understand your value, and be prepared to advocate for yourself. The audience response was overwhelming, with many women approaching me afterward to share similar experiences or ask for advice. I realized that my individual battle had broader implications for workplace culture and accountability. At Nexus, we implemented new HR protocols and whistleblower protections designed to prevent similar situations from occurring. All termination decisions now required legal review and documentation of performance issues over time, not just vague claims of cultural fit. IP clauses were standardized and clearly explained to all employees upon hiring. My relationship with Jason evolved into a stronger, more transparent partnership. He had learned a painful lesson about the importance of staying connected to company culture and watching for power dynamics that could turn toxic. I had learned about the importance of addressing concerns early, rather than trying to work through increasingly hostile conditions. In a moment of reflection during a strategy retreat, Jason asked me why I had chosen to come back rather than taking a settlement and moving on to another company. Because Nexus is partly my creation, I told him honestly. The brand, the market position, the voice. I helped build all of that. Walking away would have meant giving up something I believed in because a few people tried to push me out. That didn't seem right. He nodded thoughtfully. I'm grateful you fought for your place here. Not just for the company's sake, but because it forced me to see problems I was ignoring. Sometimes we need that kind of wake-up call. The experience changed me in fundamental ways. I developed more confidence in my professional judgment and became more proactive about addressing potential issues. I became a stronger advocate not just for myself but for others on my team who might not have the positional power to speak up. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that knowing your worth and standing your ground isn't just about personal benefit, it can create positive change that extends far beyond your individual situation. The funding we secured that day enabled Nexus to expand nationally and begin international operations. Our marketing strategy remained at the core of the company's success now, with proper recognition of its value and the team that created it. And I continued to lead that team wiser for the experience and committed to building a culture where talent was respected regardless of who had the loudest voice in the room. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself in a professional setting? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more workplace justice narratives. Remember that documenting everything and knowing your rights can make all the difference in these situations. Thank you for listening, and may you always know your worth in any room you enter.